mean, just for Ron, let me just say thank you for this incredible work you have been doing. You know, I'm one of your advisors, and it was wonderful to understand all the difficulties you had to came through about all this. So, if you have some advice to give some of the people here, for example, I'm looking at my professor here, who is doing the same thing with trying to record him out from this year. But what kind of advice would you give beyond what you have already said in your slides?
Well, I think, I'm not sure what advice I would have, but in terms of things that would help out the kind of project that I have, which involves very old materials, and it's very difficult to find those materials. So, the most effective thing that we've really found to do is to grab a hold of the original developers of these things, while they're still active, and if they've saved any sort of souvenirs, we try to get those from them just long enough to digitize them. But oftentimes, once material gets into a museum or an archive, and certainly into collectors' hands, it becomes very difficult for us to get our hands on it. Even in an archive where it's their business really is to provide the material, it can be very, very difficult for us. Some are very good, but mostly we have problems. Part of the problem is that the archives don't typically catalog what they have in a complete or accurate way, so we can't tell what it is that they have. And in order to find out what they have, we normally have to order it from them and pay fees for them, and we may be getting material that isn't useful for us. But particularly for a project like mine, where we're talking about using information wholesale, not retail, determining that some archive has some specific document, it doesn't solve our problems. We need to find out that an archive may have 100 documents that we need, and we need to get all of them. So, and many archives have very restrictive policies. Like, even though they don't own the material, they'll say, well, we won't give you any more than 10% of a document or any more than 100 pages of it, and you can't use it unless you come and crawl to us and get permission to do it. And so that's a frustration. It's not advice so much, but if there's any way that archives can revise their policies so that they can actually get material into the hands of projects like mine, instead of people who just need one document at a time, I guess that's the biggest advice, my biggest wish.
Thank you, Ron. We have a question here.
Well, again, it's kind of a comment or question. The point is, you are against using OCR, and you went way around, which seems to me rather complex if you have to apply it to any language that you may find. So what I was thinking to solve the problem, I agree with you that OCR are not, as they are now, are not enough. But maybe one way would be to work on the OCRs, specializing them for the different languages, put the effort there. What do you think about that?
Well, we do that to a certain extent. With a system like Google's Tesseract, you can specialize it to do things like say, well, we don't want to recognize a language in general. We just want to recognize, say, octal digits. And so sometimes we are able to use, with that kind of adaptation, use that on some very simple thing like an octal listing of an executable. But in general, my problems with OCR aren't the same kind of problems that people would have with getting whole modern software. It's these very old projects where you have very old deteriorating source materials and there's only a limited amount that you can get from it. So by the time you perfect your method of processing it, there aren't any more materials to collect anyway. And we may be rapidly reaching that point. These days, we seldom get new printouts. We're doing things like recovery of physical memory modules. And again, there's only a limited number of those in existence.
So another question.
Maybe I have another question that actually connects what you are doing around with the some of the issues that were raised before by Jess and Wendy. Then the question of copyright on the legacy software we want to access. And so in your case, I just would like to double check one. So everything that was in the Apollo mission was actually funded on federal funds. So in the US, if I'm not wrong, this is in the public domain. This is what I read in some of the source codes that you have recovered. Then, of course, you have other issues with ITAR. This applies everywhere. That's independent on copyright. But at least there you didn't have this copyright issue, right? So once you get hold of something, you can actually reproduce it. Well, for example, I remember the people in software preservation like they spent a huge amount of time and effort to try to get MPs, when they just correct me if I'm wrong. So you try to do some effort in the US to have special exception maintained in copyright law to have the ability, at least for archive, to keep copies of this software that otherwise you wouldn't be allowed to open or disassemble or import text or whatever. So the two questions is, one, can you confirm that copyright law was not a barrier for you? And Jess and Wendy, can you say more about why it has been a barrier in some of your efforts?
Well, the situation is certainly different, certainly different for software like Apollo, because as you say, in general, we assume that software which is created for the US government, it belongs to the people of the US, and therefore the government has put it into the public domain. So this is not a situation that applies to, in most cases. And I guess I would say also, don't get me started on copyright. I used to be a volunteer for Project Gutenberg, and it's a sore spot for me. Copyright is too often used to prevent access to material rather than to, for any benefit of the original creators of it. So I prefer not to say anything more.
So, Jess?
Yeah, can you summarize that question over chat? I missed a little bit of it. It was about copyright issues for software preservation.
Yes, I would expand it maybe also more in general about what are the legal issues you encountered and how you came around them.
Oh, yeah. So some of the legal issues are like technological protection measures, or TPM as we abbreviate it in the US. So in order to actually preserve software and provide access to it, and you may need to go around those digital rights management measures that are built into software, and this could potentially pose a legal risk. However, we have done a lot of work in the Software Preservation Network to build knowledge around fair use and how we can use software under the US fair use guidelines. And we've also started to work with folks in Canada to do the same thing for their fair dealing laws. So of course, I think the challenge is because it is a little bit different from jurisdiction to jurisdiction. I think it can be difficult to create guidelines that work internationally, all across the world for any jurisdiction. So that's a really big challenge, but we continue to kind of chip away and start to work on work with other countries. So if you're interested, if you don't have any resources in your jurisdiction for how to navigate your own laws around software and what you can do with your organization to preserve software, please, get involved in the Software Preservation Network, and the Law and Policy Working Group will work with you to figure that out for your jurisdiction. And I don't know, there's other SPIN members on the, call too that have been involved maybe in some of those efforts too. So you guys feel free to add things in the chat.
Thank you very much. There is a question from the online public. It's actually from Florencia Pierri, and it's to Ron. So she asks, what do you do with the physical material once you have scanned it? Do you have a personal archive of the physical as well as the digital material?
I personally am interested only in content, not in the physical artifacts. There's a brisk market in physical artifacts, and they fetch high prices. So one of the things you know, I do when I find, say, one of the original developers who has some material, you know, I hasten to tell them I don't want the physical artifact. In fact, if I can con the original owner into scanning the material for us, and so that I don't ever have to touch it, that's even better, because otherwise we may have to ship it around the country, and FedEx or the Postal Service may lose it and it's irreplaceable, and you hate that. So I do have a couple of items. I do have the, as far as I know, one in a kind in the world OBDC assembly listing that I mentioned. And I do have, some materials that occasionally the original developers will send me, and they just don't care to have it back, so I'll keep it. But no, I have nothing. It always goes back to the original owners.
My name is Mathilde and I work at Inria. I have a very naive question, maybe. So as well mentioned, there is a huge forest with many trees and many leaves. What makes a good source code to try to recover or work on? How do you decide how to start such projects? What kind of criteria do you look at before starting the end year?
So this was a question to Ron or to Jess? To both. Okay, who wants to start to answer?
Well, I can give you a very brief answer on my part. Anything somebody's willing to give us access to is something that we'll work on, as long as it's involved in the Gemini and Apollo, flight computers in some way, no matter how peripheral. So that's it for me.
Yeah, I myself am not an expert on reproducibility, but I don't know if some of the folks on the call who have worked with actually emulating software might want to talk about that. The question was, what makes code the most preservable? Like, what are some tips that you can give for creating software that is more easily archived?
Thank you. There is a question from Ethan. No, from Larry. I'm sorry. Changed. So from Larry, from the online participants. So it's for both of you, and it's, could you talk about the interface between the single focus preservation projects and the broad archival focus organization? So I would start with Jess.
Yeah, Larry, I don't know if you meant software heritage when you said the broad archival focused organization or the software preservation network, but answering just from the perspective of the software preservation network, we do really want to work with folks like Ron and people who are doing preservation projects that are individualized to discuss, all together how to bring all of these different skills back into the organizations that are doing software preservation as well. So we have worked with Interlist, which Larry is a part of, to have those conversations with folks on specific projects. We also often have specific projects represented at our public software preservation forums. So we learn from each other in those spaces as well.
And on the low end, as I said, we didn't originally have any notion of software preservation at all. That's something that evolved over time. So we don't really have, any kind of interface. I mean, our software goes into our GitHub repository, and then, I believe that it's going to be vacuumed up afterwards, but it's all transparent to us, really.
Thank you. I've got a question from Paul Ceruzzi. Hi, Paul. So it's to Ron, and it is, if you had physical access to the LVDC core memory module, would it be of use to your project?
Well, speaking in a general way, it would be wonderful. I don't actually know anything about the internals of the LVDC, so I don't think it's probably a module per se. The LVDC had actually had random access memory in it. And so the code was uploaded to it, and it wasn't manufactured with code in it. We don't have any physical way to read it off, but, you know, we would certainly, I'm sure we'd find a way if we had physical access to one of the things. So please.
Yes, so maybe maybe I'll put you two in touch. So there is another question from Somaya Langley. And it's for both Jess and Ron. So collecting institutions acquire complex digital content, including software, code, etc., e.g. a zip file deposited into a university digital repository, without the requisite technical expertise or resources, budget or staff. So if you were to improve the current practices in a bare minimum way, what would you suggest? What could donors, depositors do better? What could the collecting institutions do better? So I would start with Jess. I mean, this is a very, very, very broad question, but yes, we're happy to hear your views. So first, Jess, and then Ron.
Yeah, I guess having some guidelines from the digital repository for, you know, donors or depositors to follow. You know, we talk about a lot, I think, in research reproducibility and the role that journals actually have and requiring, you know, different types of documentation that goes along with software that's developed for research projects. And so that's one way that I also think about, you know, a way to sort of improve practices, but I guess that does always go back to the creators. So another thing that I think is just that we really need more staff that can help mediate these deposits and can help creators actually deposit things in a preservable way. We can't, you know, we can't expect all individuals to be like experts at preservation and doing, you know, all of the things that we think about as archivists and preservationists.
Ron, would you like to?
Yeah, I speaking for myself, I think that one of the big things that archives could do is better categorize the material that they have. And I understand they may not have the expertise to do that, but they also don't have, they're also typically not willing to accept input from people who found out that their catalog is in error, or allow people to come in necessarily and catalog their materials for them when they have special information. So, you know, Neil Armstrong's papers all went into the Purdue University archive, and Margaret Hamilton's papers all went up into the Smithsonian archives and so forth. And both of those places have, you know, errors in their catalogs describing what they have. And you tell them that they have errors, and those errors are never corrected. So that would be my recommendation, to be able to accept information from outside resources that tells them better what they have.
Thank you. So I'm going to leave the stage to Roberto. That might.
I was
yes.
trying to, because I see in the question
yes.
that I have been called out. So let me provide a little bit of dreams here. And so what we can do to do things better. But first of all, you see, just meeting like this one is one first step to go towards doing things better. We want to interconnect people. And then a long list. Okay, we need resources. Everybody needs resources. But as Jess or Wendy already pointed out, there are competing requests for resources. Not everybody wants to build their own local archive or something like this. So we should take an engineer approach to this problem. That is to say, let's see what is common and can be shared. And this is where we at SWHAP are trying to provide all of you a tool. I mean, a tool that provides archival and reference globally. So don't build another archive, another references. This is just a very basic step. It is far from enough. And everybody has already said. You have seen in the presentation by Ron how complex this is. But then there is another thing where politically, not politically, on the policy level, we can do things. And it is important to remark that this meeting today is under the auspices of UNESCO, which is an ideal place to take steps. Like, for example, I had the chance, not like many others here, to visit some of the beautiful computer museums that are around. There are incredible resources, but these are fragmented and not connected. So my dream at some moment in time is to see the Museum of Computing do the same thing as other museums do. You know? A place where you can say, I found this particular material which is on a particular cartridge or something. I need help in reading. Who has the material able for doing this? You have this little comment here, Ron, that somebody is kind of offering you let's say, a hard copy of the software you're looking for. I mean, these kind of things should be much more straightforward, and we should organize. I mean, I'm not advocating necessarily for Taylorism or for this, but I mean, let's try to identify the resources we need, the special purpose capacities we need, build capacity, help other institutions that already have archives or things like this, get up to speed of the kind of technological needs we have, and software and materials around this, and work together to do this. I think UNESCO, as you have today, is a starting point to launch such kind of operation in a more organized, more structural way. It will take time, right? It will take time. But I think this is a small suggestion of what I would like to see.
Okay, one last question, because we are running out of time, but please come and introduce yourself.
So good afternoon. I'm Johan Nobas. Here as a member of the nonprofit organization MSI.com. I say it in a French way because it's very French. Well, anyway, it's just a good opportunity. So I have to say that in MSI.com, we do preserve also the physical material. So if you don't know what to do with the physical, then please contact us. Well, anyway.
Thank you.
So, as I just said, I'm here as a scholar, but also as a member of the non-profit organization. And both speakers have talked about volunteers, and I'm quite interested by the statue and the need of volunteers in what you're doing.
So, Jess and Ron, quickly, and then maybe we'll continue this conversation in the during the round table that will be moderated by Pierre Mounier-Kuhn at 5, where you are all welcome to ask more questions also about the first part of the day. So yes, briefly.
Yeah, we have a very lean staffing model at the Software Preservation Network. So I work 20 hours a week for the network. And so most of what we do, everything that we do really is done by volunteers. I just coordinate the volunteers and I recruit the volunteers. So that is like a core part of what we're doing. Yeah, we have built out a lot of different ways to engage groups. We do a lot of leadership trainings so that volunteers can take on collaborative work. These skills help them back at their own institutions where they can project manage for other projects back at their home institutions as well. So we do a lot of that meta skills building that is required to, like I said, is the foundation of collective action. Knowing how to work together and knowing how to lead each other is so important to that. And that's how we engage with volunteers.
Thank you. Ron?
And we have no such thing, and there's no organization as such. You know, I and a couple of other people who are interested in this sort of, you know, work on it as we feel like it. And there's a mailing list that I've set up. And if I need help, you know, I need somebody to pay for some digitization, or I need somebody to do some transcriptions, we just put out a call on the mailing list and we say who wants to volunteer to help. And then usually enough people to come forward to help us out. And that's it. It's very informal.
Thank you very much to all the participants and all the speakers. Thank you.